Hi, everyone. This is Justin Stofron for another edition of your Probably Getting Screwed interviews. And I'm really excited to be joined today by Arlene Martínez from Good Jobs First. We're going to be talking about corporate subsidies and accountability. But Arlene, want to start giving you an opportunity to introduce yourself.
Hi, Justin. Thanks for having me today. My name's Arlene Martinez. I'm the Deputy Executive Director and Communications Director with Good Jobs First.
Excellent. Well, could you? I find Good Jobs First to be an incredible resource, both for our newsletter as well as I've utilized the organization for other pieces I've written, and even at times in my professional work. But could you provide sort of an overview of what the organization is, the work that you all do?
Yeah, Good Jobs first started in 1998. We're a corporate welfare watchdog. So we've been tracking how much companies are receiving from the public since 1988. And we also uh, expose corporate misbehavior. So we have various databases that track subsidies that companies are getting and also the regulatory actions taken against companies for cheating workers, harming the environment, defrauding the government, and on and on.
Yeah, well, speaking of that work and speaking of some of the databases that you have, there was a story in I think it was the Washington Post a month or two ago about all of the corporate subsidies, government funding that Elon Musk and the various businesses that he owns have received over the years. And that article sort of utilized the subsidy tracker database, which is an excellent tool that folks should check out. Arlene, can you talk a little bit about what the the data you have shows about the subsidies that Elon Musk's companies have received?
Yeah, that was a great story by the Washington Post, and some of the data they used is in our subsidy tracker database, especially at the state and local level, which is really what we track there. And looked at, well, we also have some federal programs in there too, but there you could see how much Musk's companies, we have a parent subsidiary matching too, so it's not just Tesla, but it's also SpaceX and all its other companies that have received subsidies. And the Post reporters went further and they also used, of course, credits that consumers received and as well as federal procurement contracts that Tesla and Musk's companies have received. And they were able to paint this big picture of how critical and vital these subsidies were to Musk's success, especially in those early years. And now, of course, he wants to make sure that no other company or competitor gets them. You know, that story came out on an interesting day because that was the day that Jeff Bezos, the Amazon founder, said that he was only going to allow op-eds that were about free market principles. And of course, Bezos is one of the biggest corporate welfare recipients of all time globally. We've documented $11.6 billion in the United States, but we know that's a significant undercount, and that doesn't count the rest of the world.
Wow. Here in Minnesota, having a big conversation on data centers this legislative session, both on a subsidy front, but also on like land use, environmental impacts, impacts to ratepayers and utilities. But would be curious, just sort of at a high level, the work that you all have been doing on data centers and what you've been finding.
Yeah, we've done quite a bit on data centers, and we'll be doing more this year. But data centers they're a great example of all the things that are wrong with the way that we give subsidies away in this country, that the way we do economic development. So especially with data centers, who's getting these subsidies tend to be some of the biggest, most profitable companies in the world. So if you think about why incentives are necessary in the first place, it's to help spur activity that wouldn't have otherwise occurred. Of course, that's not the case with data centers at all. These companies have to build them if they want to stay competitive. So it's very core to their business model. And those other factors you use too, there's all kinds of public health factors that that are going to be costs for the communities that are also providing these tax benefits to these companies for. So it's going, and then on top of that, you'll have the rates that are expected to go up because the grid needs to be expanded to accommodate these massive energy demands that these centers have. So you really have kind of a triple way that taxpayers are going to be on the hook for these centers in terms of not just the straight out subsidies, the rate costs, they're going to see their bills go up, and they're going to have a lot of these health impacts. And the companies aren't going to be paying their what they owe in taxes. In some cases, these subsidy agreements are 50 years long. So we're talking 2 generations worth before a company is paying their full bill, if they ever do, right? Because what we see often is that once a subsidy is put into place, once it ends, the company wants an extension, or they'll ask for a reassessment of their property, so their property tax bill will drop dramatically. So there's all kinds of ways that we're going to get harmed by these data centers. And one of the biggest problems is, again, what I started with, the biggest companies in the world, most profitable companies, getting paid to do what they have to do.
I'm curious just what you find in terms of like public perception around the way we're doing economic development.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest dogmas that we fight against is the idea that tax breaks create jobs. Right? They just don't in most cases. The jobs that are created aren't necessarily new. They might just reshuffle people from another company, or they come in and a company like Amazon or Walmart, they get a big subsidy and they'll decimate the local business community. So it's something that we message very heavily about, and so do our partners and allies, is the idea that these tax breaks are not creating jobs. And it's really working closely with policymakers too, because I was a journalist for a long time. I went to a lot of city council meetings, a lot of school board meetings. These officials want to do good things for their community, and they think bringing in a big company like Amazon is the way to do that. But the truth is, and study after study has shown across the political spectrum, that these are real losers for communities, because you have all the stress of a new company coming in with roads and sewer and water, and they're paying none of the money to help support their own operations. Um, and yeah, I think there is uh, a misperception that these are being distributed out in some equitable or even thoughtful way. Sometimes it's really just that a big company comes in with a lot of power, and big companies disproportionately get all the subsidies. Our tracker shows that very clearly. So, like you said, it's the biggest companies getting about 90% of the dollars. That study showed that you referenced.
I think it's really helpful what you brought up about local officials, because I think it can be easy sometimes to view this as simply a like a corruption issue, and I know that that is a component of this, but in a lot of ways it's maybe even tougher because it's not a corruption. It's sort of this, yeah, this dogma, this like sort of ideology of how we create jobs or how we spur economic development, because local officials want to do that, and they should want to do that. It's just that we need sort of a different toolkit. Um, so I'm curious. So much of the subsidy issue is a state and local kind of problem, as you mentioned, which I think presents its own unique challenges, but also opportunities for folks like our readers to be able to contact much easier to contact your local state legislator, your local city council member than it can be a member of Congress or something like that. So, what are there tools that you all have for folks looking to work with policymakers in their communities to stop these kinds of subsidies, or even just thoughts on what you've seen in recent years about the conversations at a state and local level about these things?
Yeah, I think there's a real local officials have so much power and authority to give out subsidies. So it really is an issue where you can go to your local community and ask them to provide input into these deals, into blocking them, or even just asking for something in return, right? So if a company comes in, working with your local leaders to say, hey, we should get something in return, whether typically some of the things that we suggest, because we work with a lot of grassroots groups who are dealing with big companies who have come in looking for a massive subsidy. If it looks like the vote is going to go their way, to get things like high paying jobs, make sure the jobs are permanent, make sure they are local, right? So the people paying for the incentives at least get the benefit of the jobs. I think there also is there should be there could be a lot more transparency in the process, right? So local officials have a lot of authority to ask the company to say, hey, open up your books, show me why you should get this subsidy. You're saying you wouldn't do the project without it. Prove it. You want our money? Open up your books. And a lot of officials are reluctant to do that. I'm not sure they know that they can do that. Um, and of course, companies also want uh, officials to sign non disclosure agreements. So the process is completely lacking in transparency. And I think residents have a lot of power to say, hey, we need to know what we're giving the money for. We need the company name and the dollar figure, which often isn't released. And in places where this has happened, where the books have opened, it's been because of public pressure. Chicago gives a lot of tax increment financing money. It loses billions of dollars. It's the biggest TIF city in the country. And it's also one of the most transparent cities in the country in terms of, so we know just how bad the problem is there. And that was really from public pressure. And same with Alabama. Alabama had some of the worst transparency. It still does, but it had even worse transparency when it comes to these deals. And a group got together in Alabama and said, "Hey, we need some information on what money's going to what company." And they just passed a couple years ago a new bill that does provide that kind of information. So public support can be really powerful when it comes to a very base first step, transparency at least.
Absolutely. Well, that's great, and I think hopefully folks listening to this will take away that message that there's something you can do about this, and it's interconnected into all the other sort of broader issues that we talk about in terms of consolidation and economic power. Like these subsidies are transferring power over to big corporations that already have lots of power. Arlene, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us. Is there anything I again will highly recommend that folks go to your website, check out the subsidy tracker, the corporate violations tracker, but anything else to add real quick as we wrap up?
Yeah, just want to add that a lot of times it's about presenting the alternative vision too, right? So this is money that would otherwise go to the general fund and could be used on public services. It could be used for small business support. It could be used for improving schools. It could be used for boosting parks, healthcare, any public service you care about. This is money that they would receive that's instead going to shareholders and corporate leaders. So thinking about what that money could be used for and presenting that alternative case too is very helpful for this type of work.
Yeah, I love that. Well, thank you so much, Arlene. Keep up the great work, and yeah, again, everyone should go check out the website, check out all your reports and information. It's great.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Justin.